Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to our study of the excellent path to enlightenment, which is Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche's commentary on a short ngöndro written by Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. So kindly generate the intention to apply this in order to establish all sentient beings at the level of perfect enlightenment. So presently we have completed the general section of the outer preliminaries, and we are now looking at the inner section, which has 5 parts: refuge, bodhicitta, vajrasattva, mandala offering, and guru yoga. And we're presently then in the section on bodhicitta. Now bodhicitta, in some way we could say, really constitutes the main practice of the Mahayana. This path, the Mahayana path of bodhicitta, enables us to achieve perfect enlightenment. It operates from the point of view of the sutras, the gradual path. So we do say that this path, compared to the Vajrayana, because it makes use of our ordinary mind, then it is said to be a gradual path, a path of gradually eliminating confusion and gradually uncovering enlightenment. The Vajrayana in general operates with the insight into wisdom and making that the vehicle. But for us to gain wisdom, which is very subtle and not at all on the familiar premises of our ego, our ignorance, our insecurity, our obscurations, karmic patterns, and all of this, then it is necessary to operate with the gradual path as well. And so we have the Mahayana path, and within the Tibetan tradition, there is great emphasis on unifying these two approaches, the approach of the sutra, the gradual approach of the sutra, and the resultant approach of mantra. So even as practitioners of Vajrayana, we establish a foundation through the practice of ngöndro, and then within the ngöndro we can see the scope of what we're doing in terms of this, the developing, the cultivation of bodhicitta. So we have the what we call relative and absolute bodhicitta. The absolute bodhicitta is when all the conceptual constructs, Buddhas, sentient beings, and so forth fall away, and we awaken into the primordial ground of awakening. This is the absolute bodhicitta, and the Mahayana path then accommodates this perfect enlightenment. The relative bodhicitta, as long as we still have notions of self and other sentient beings, Buddhas, and so forth, operates with the two kinds of bodhicitta of aspiring and developing this wish of selflessness, that our journey is motivated by this concern for all sentient beings. And this we particularly generate through what we call the four boundless, the wish that all beings be happy, which is loving kindness, the wish that all beings be free of suffering, which is compassion, the rejoicing in the happiness of all sentient beings, sympathetic joy, or rejoicing when sentient beings are happy, and then finally equanimity, that our wish for others' well-being is not limited only to a few. So this is part of the generating what we call the bodhicitta, the relative bodhicitta of aspiration. And then we have the relative bodhicitta of application, which are then the 6 paramitas: generosity, discipline, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. So as we engage in the path, we first want to generate this attitude of bodhicitta on the basis of both our aspiration and our application. So the aspiration is then the wish that all beings, the wish to establish all beings in enlightenment. That's actually how we normally define bodhicitta, and this is also what we find in Shantideva's definition. Bodhicitta is the wish to establish all beings in enlightenment. And here in the context of the ngöndro then, we're generating this. Now recently, Khenpo Chöng Dorje, he was here in Australia, and he he mentioned this wonderful anecdote from the Kadampa tradition of, as he was telling it, it was one of Atisha's students who really realized he needed to practice the Dharma, and so he started doing a lot of Dharma practice. So he would do mandala offerings and circumambulations and so forth. And every time he engaged in something, Atisha came along and he was doing maybe mandala offerings, and he asked Atisha, "So is this good?" And Atisha says, "Yeah, that's very good. But it'd be good if you really practice the Dharma." And then he would go away, and then the chap would be doing circumambulations, and then Atisha would come by and he would ask Atisha, "So how am I doing here?" And he said, "Yeah, it's good, but it would be good if you really were practicing the Dharma." And of course, at the end of the day, the point was that the Dharma practice is not about behavior. It's not about what we're doing. It's not about, I've done retreat, I've done this, I've done that, hey, where's my enlightenment, So it's nothing to do with behavior. It's not what we do with our body and speech, even though they can be the skillful means to facilitate the real point, which is the mind, the attitude. So, of course, we could maybe say thanks to the chap doing all the mandala offering and the circumambulations. He accumulated the good karma to have Atisha come and point to the heart of the practice. But the point, of course, also is that we really need to understand that our entire journey is premised on the attitude. So in this case, it is then the wish to establish the infinity of sentient beings on the level of enlightenment. And this, of course, also comes with enlightenment, not as a sort of a long slog, a long big thing that we have to do, because that's the nature of enlightenment. The nature of enlightenment is the selfless manifestation to all sentient beings. So in here, Khyentse Rinpoche says, the practice we do may involve the body, speech, and mind. Of these three, the most important is the mind. The benefits from practicing with the body, doing prostrations and circumambulations, and with the speech reciting prayers and mantras are, it is true, considerable. But unless the mind is directly fully towards the Dharma, these benefits will be limited. Take the object of refuge as your witness and firmly make the promise, from now on, I will not have a single selfish thought. Even if I recite Om Mani Padme Hum just once, I shall do it for the sake of all beings. If I have a single thought of devotion to my teacher, that too will be for the sake of all beings. This promise to work for the sake of all sentient beings is called bodhicitta of aspiration. The positive actions one does to fulfill this aspiration constitute bodhicitta as action, or bodhicitta as application. So this is what I just mentioned before, the bodhicitta of aspiration, the bodhicitta of application. Bodhicitta, Khyentse Rinpoche says, has boundless benefits and very few dangers. Why? Because if one is practicing solely for the sake of all beings, one's motivation is so pure that it becomes invulnerable to obstacles and aberrations. It is a profound practice and, at the same time, a simple one. In essence, bodhicitta is the aim to become enlightened in order to help others attain enlightenment. When you undertake the actual practice of bodhicitta, again, recite the 4-line prayer combining refuge and bodhicitta 100,000 times. this time without doing bodhicitta, without doing prostrations, and concentrate mainly on the meaning of the Bodhisattva vow. At the end of each session, pray to the object of refuge in the sky before you. May bodhicitta take birth in my being just as it is in Guru Rinpoche's wisdom mind. So we aspire that we may follow in the footsteps of the great beings of the past. We might not exactly know how perfect bodhicitta is. And for that reason, it then makes sense to actually say, well, I'll take whatever he's having, so to speak. I'll have the bodhicitta as it exists within Guru Rinpoche's wisdom mind, or any great sage in the lineage. So as we do that, then we hold on. As we do this, we recite this as we generate this. Sorry, what am I doing here? Here we are. As we do the practice in this particular context, then we say 100,000 times of the bodhicitta. In various ngöndros, it's explained in different ways. But this is how we do it here, and certainly in the Ngondro again it applies. We do it as per time. We do this slightly differently. Also, this also something I just learned from Khyentse Dorje, and I think it probably is optional. But you know, when we do the taking of refuge, then we do this together with all sentient beings, with the object of refuge as those to whom we supplicate for safety and refuge. Whereas when we take this bodhicitta vow, he was mentioning something that I thought is quite helpful. We actually sit alone in front of the refuge tree. And I think that kind of brings home the sense of the vow that we're taking, and we're willing to do it on our own. It's not like all of us, we're going to do it. And then we end up looking to the others and saying, hey, they're not doing as much as I'm doing. so I thought there's some skill actually in when we do taking the bodhicitta vow, that we do it sitting alone in front of the refuge tree, or what we call the field of accumulation. And the thing is here, at this point, all the lineage masters and so forth, the object of refuge is here our witness. So as we're taking this vow, they're there as our witness, and there's some sense of I feel some sense of immediacy if there's some sort of how do you say, the point is really brought home if we're sitting there on our own saying, I will establish all sentient beings at the level of enlightenment. So Khyentse Rinpoche goes on to say, then all the lineage teachers and deities melt into light and dissolve from the periphery toward the center into Guru Rinpoche. Guru Rinpoche himself melts into light and dissolves into you. At that moment, think that Guru Rinpoche's fully manifested bodhicitta has become inseparably united with your own mind. Finally conclude with this wish. May bodhicitta take its birth in those in whom it has not taken birth, and where it has been born, let it not decline, but swell and increase ever more and more. So this is the famous bodhicitta prayer that we recite in a slightly different translation, but there are a few different translations. Don't get hung up on the words, rather pay attention to the meaning. We should remember that the main obstacle which prevented us from generating bodhicitta before was the distinction we made between friends and enemies. When we realize that all beings have in the past been our loving parents, it is meaningless to regard any of them as enemies. It is equally meaningless to be attached to friends, not only in the past and future lives, but even within this lifetime. There have been people who were once very close to us, but who later became our enemies. It does not make sense to cling rigidly to the concept of friend and enemy. Once we completely give up attachment on the one hand and aversion on the other, we will regard all sentient beings with perfect equanimity, like a pair of scales that balances when the weight on each side is the same. four boundless qualities. We sometimes refer to these as the four boundless. Now, there's a difference between this as it's developed in different traditions. Sometimes we would refer to these as the four Brahma Viharas. But the thing about the Brahma Viharas is that they are not necessarily seen as being boundless. There are still some limitation to this, and we would say that in the Mahayana, the four boundless implies the absolute infinitude of what the scope of this meditation is. To develop bodhicitta, we need to cultivate four boundless qualities: loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Of these four, the most fundamental is boundless equanimity, where no distinction is made between friend and enemy. And it is with this that we should begin our meditation. Boundless equanimity leads to the wisdom of equality, one of the five wisdoms of an enlightened Buddha. Now, just to preempt some of the questions that very often come in conjunction with the meditation of boundless equanimity, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we should stop treating those that are close to us, that we happen to be connected with karmically in this life. All of a sudden we have to develop some sort of equanimity in which we behave and we think and we speak differently to them from what we've done before. Of course, this is our karmic situation and this is how we do things. It more refers just to that we actually also care about those that, first of all, that we dislike, and also those to whom we have no real relationship with. That there is a sense that right now we're maybe in a particular location due to causes and conditions, but ultimately we dedicate our entire being, as long as there is samsara, to all sentient beings. So it's an overall attitude. It's not something that necessarily translates into something where we tell our spouses and children, saying, sorry, now I'm meditating equanimity, I'm not going to be any more nice to you than to the people who we meet in the supermarket or in the parking lot, and so on, right? So that's not what we mean with in equanimity. It means that we ultimately are there for all sentient beings equally, but of course the ordinary situation that we might have some commitment to still applies. To illustrate, Khyentse Rinpoche says, to illustrate how a bodhisattva puts the welfare of others before his or her own, we may recall one of Lord Buddha's previous lives, in which he took rebirth as a turtle in the ocean. When 5 sailors were thrown into the sea from their wrecked ship, the turtle came to the surface and, using human words, said to them, "Get on my back, I will take you to dry land." With great difficulty, the turtle carried the 5 sailors to the shore of an island. They were saved. But the turtle was completely exhausted and needed to rest on the beach. It fell asleep. While it was sleeping, 80,000 small insects came upon the turtle and started to eat its body. The turtle awoke in great pain, but it thought, if I go into the water now, all these insects will be killed. So it decided to give its own flesh and blood for them. The 80,000 insects and worms ate up the whole turtle. Just as it was about to die, it made the following wish, for it was a great bodhisattva. This is by the way, from the Jataka tales, and this is one of the stories of the Buddha's previous lives. And hence then, as a bodhisattva, he then aspired, when I finally become a fully enlightened Buddha, may these 5 sailors and 80,000 insects be the first to whom I teach the Dharma and thereby set on the path of enlightenment. Such was the power of this prayer, that when Buddha Shakyamuni attained enlightenment, it was for the 5 excellent disciples, the 5 bhikkhus who had previously been the 5 sailors, that he turned the wheel of the Dharma for the first time. And his first teaching in the deer park at Sarnath near Varanasi was also attended by 80,000 celestial beings who had previously been the 80,000 insects. This is an example of ultimate compassion, the ability to put the welfare of others before one's own. Let's see if there's any questions at this point. Can you explain the difference between Sukha and Mahasukha? are both translated as bliss. well, sukha is the opposite of dukkha, and it means then, yes, it means bliss. Mahasukha is more a Vajrayana, more occurs in the Vajrayana context, and it simply refers to the bliss, the fearless bliss of the Bodhisattva. That there's nothing really that throws the Bodhisattva. Everything the Bodhisattva engages in becomes a source of joy. So remember Chögyam Trungpa speaking about Mahasukha, he distinguished it from cheap thrills. Cheap thrills being when we get what we want, sort of the hedonistic satisfaction of just being gratified. Our ego is gratified, and that's very fragile. It doesn't last, and it really just consolidates, making more ego, right? So that's cheap thrill, but the Bodhisattva not being the joy and the confidence of the Bodhisattva not being conditioned in any way is then great bliss. So both are a kind of sukha, then one is we referred more to as mahasukha. And then somebody says, it's good to know that it doesn't mean we have to reduce, that equanimity doesn't mean we have to reduce the loving feeling we feel for those we're karmically connected to. Okay, good. All right. So bodhisattvas never feel hatred towards those who cause them suffering. They experience only compassion for them and the desire to help them. As to friends and family, they regard them as illusory beings, encountered in a dream. No emotional ties affect the equanimity of their love or hinder their practice of Dharma. Freed from the chains of hate and attachment, they show kindness to all beings impartially. Being around Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who's the Lama on the left, the author of the work that we're studying, probably needing no further introduction. But I remember Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche was very tender with his family and relatives and friends. Because you could say relatives and friends, they had the confidence to be there. But of course, Rinpoche was equally actually loving anyone. But there's also different degrees of openness. So sometimes we have more potential for reaching those that are close to us. But certainly Khyentse Rinpoche was very, very loving to anyone that came to see him, and to, I'm sure, without any doubt, to all sentient beings, but also very, very warm, extending himself very much to those that were connected closely to him. Mind you, also being close to a great bodhisattva like that, particularly when you have the merit, then also Khyentse Rinpoche could be a little bit strict with those close students. And in general, we do say that the wrath that sometimes a bodhisattva may exhibit to close disciples is then an expression of compassion, and also really intended to dispel obstacles. Anyway, so loving kindness is the wish that others will experience happiness and find the causes of this happiness. Yeah? So we have now these four boundaries. We've discussed equanimity, and now we're looking at loving kindness. So loving kindness is then the wish that they have happiness. They have the causes of happiness. The focus is then happiness. For example, compassion, that's the focus on the suffering that sentient beings are going through, and the not being able to bear it. But loving kindness is this joy of wishing that all beings have happiness. So Khyentse Rinpoche says, all beings long for happiness, but hardly any achieve it. So to wish them as much happiness as possible, and to wish that they may find the causes of happiness, is called loving kindness. Loving kindness has immeasurable qualities. If you have this love deep within your being, you naturally benefit others. And there is no way that any kind of evil influence can harm you, for compassion is the most powerful weapon against negative forces. Yeah. So I'm wondering here if maybe it should say loving kindness is the most powerful weapon against negative forces. But either way, in another story about Lord Buddha's previous lives as a bodhisattva, he was born as a king named Power of Love. It happened that 5 fierce ogres, or rakshasas, entered his kingdom. They reached a place where some shepherds were herding sheep and other animals. The Rakshasas thought that they would easily be able to kill them with their sharp nails and teeth like iron. But they could not inflict the slightest injury on either the shepherds or the animals. Enraged, they exclaimed, "What is this? Anywhere else in the world we can easily kill anybody, but here we cannot even make a scratch on your skin." The shepherds replied, "It is due to the power of our king, who meditates constantly upon loving kindness in his palace." The Rakshasas were amazed to hear of such an exceptional being and asked the shepherds if they could meet their king. So the shepherds took them to the king, where they cried, "We need flesh to live, but we cannot kill even the smallest creature in your realm." The king thought, "If they find nothing to eat, these Rakshasas will die. But I don't want to sacrifice any lives. I can only nourish them with my own flesh." And so this is what he did. The moment the Rakshasas tasted the king's flesh, love for those around them filled their hearts, and all desire to harm others disappeared. So this is boundless loving kindness. Of course, it applies when we hear these stories from the Jataka and other tales. We might think, "Gosh, that's above my present scope," and of course, that's a given. But it's nevertheless, we can rejoice and we can sense the magnanimity. We might have some sort of cynicism that says, "Oh, this is ridiculous. What's he on about?" But actually, it's not. It is really something that indicates the capacity of love. And we find this also in parents that will happily give their own lives so that their children be okay. We have this in relatives that give their kidneys and things and so forth. So this is not at all something that is impossible. Of course, the way that it's presented here is intended to highlight the degree of such admirable degree of, in this case, loving kindness. But it's at the same time also, it relates to something that we also have in ourselves as a potential. Boundless compassion is the wish that all beings, without exception, may be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So we've done boundless equanimity, boundless loving kindness, and now the third one, boundless loving compassion. And it's then this that's attended to the suffering of sentient beings. And we're wishing that they're free from that suffering and the causes of suffering. This feeling is born from contemplating the suffering of others and wishing to do something about it. There are many realms other than the human realm. The hell realms, for instance, are filled with endless suffering. Imagine that your parents have fallen into these hell realms and are being set upon and stabbed with thousands of weapons and burned by intensely hot fires. You will feel a strong impulse to do something to relieve their suffering and rescue them from their torment. So we think that all sentient beings at one point or another have been our parents. So generating compassion for all sentient beings, then we do that with thinking that our parents, our mother, our father, or anybody that we see as someone who has been completely selfless towards us, seeing this as something that they're undergoing these various sufferings. And this is then where we really wish that they not suffer. So this then we extend. Beings are suffering everywhere in samsara. They're suffering from being burnt or frozen in the hell realms, from thirst and hunger in the realm of hungry ghosts, from being enslaved and slaughtered in the animal realm, from birth, old age, sickness and death in the human realm, from jealousy and conflict in the realm of the demigods, and in the God realm, from losing their pleasurable lives and falling back into lower existences. If you reflect on all these, you will feel how wonderful it would be if I could free them all from their suffering. Boundless joy is the joy you should feel when you see gifted and learning beings who are happy, famous, or influential. So this is then finally boundless joy. And again, very often when we enumerate these, we start off saying loving kindness, then compassion, then boundless joy, and then finally equanimity. And that's how they're usually, you could say, listed. But in the way that it is taught, and particularly then within the Longchen Nyingtik, it says, in the words of my perfect teacher, it'll say, in our tradition, then we begin with the meditation on equanimity, boundless equanimity, and also as Khyentse Rinpoche says, this is the most skillful way to begin these meditations. But now then, we arrive at boundless joy. And that is the joy that you should feel when you see these, gifted and learning beings who are happy, famous, or influential. We rejoice. We're happy for them. The opposite is obviously resenting that they're better off than ourselves. It's said that if to sort of little bit speak about, you could call it the phenomenology of this, imagine that we are resenting it. See, when we resent somebody being successful, then we are freezing and solidifying ourselves as not having that. Whereas if we're rejoicing in them, saying, wow, this great talent, we're actually becoming part of their joy. And so that's where we know we're not excluding them the way that we do that if we solidify ourselves as other than them. Rejoicing is breaking down the wall between their joy, their fame, their influence, their talent, whatever, and it becomes part of us. So this sympathetic joy, it's very often said that it generates the same merit as if we were doing whatever they're doing. We also hear talking about, for example, if when we're rejoicing somebody doing Dharma practice, yeah? So Khyentse Rinpoche says, instead of feeling uneasy and envious of their good fortune, rejoice sincerely thinking, may they continue to be happy and enjoy even more happiness. Pray too that they may use their wealth and power to help others, to serve the Dharma and the Sangha, making offerings, building monasteries, propagating the teachings, and performing other worthwhile deeds. Rejoice and make a wish, may they never lose all their happiness and privileges. May their happiness increase more and more, and may they use it to benefit others and to further the teaching. So this is somewhat set in a Buddhist context in Tibet, where somebody who had means would, in many cases, if they had the merit, the intelligence, and so forth, they would, that's where they might put their wealth and so forth. This is not always the case in the modern world, when we talk about Dharma and Sangha and so forth. But at the same time, we also do have philanthropy, we do have all sorts of charitable organizations that do the same thing. And so we could rejoice in that. So this, by the way, is great Sakya Master. So in the context of this text we're studying, we have various tankas that actually represent the previous lives of the Khyentse Rinpoches. The Khyentse Rinpoches, of course, are as bodhisattvas manifest infinitely. Like a Kamtrul Dunju Nyima, the 8th Kamtrul Rinpoche, once said to a friend of mine, he was asking, there's a lot of them, there's a lot of Khyentses and there's a lot of Kamtruls. What is this? And he says, Kamtrul Rinpoche says, it's not that we can see 4 or 5. That's not who they really are. There's millions of them. And so the bodhisattvas, they manifest infinitely. But in the context of then what we could call the incarnation lineages of the Khyentses, we identify some major masters, and particularly in the vein of the Rime spirit, we identify particularly some important masters in the various Buddhist traditions that were the Khyentses at one point. And so if you look in the Guru Yoga of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche and also some of the Guru Yogas of Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo and others, they're very often, the mandala is very often comprised of masters from the various lineages. In this case, a previous incarnation of the Khyentses was Jetsun Chakpa Gyaltsen, who was the, what is it again? He was the son of Sachin Kunga Nyingpo, and I think he was the uncle of Sakya Pandita, the grandchild of Konjo Gyalpo. And he was also, and he was obviously a great master. And recently here in Australia, Khenpo Dorje was teaching from a text written by Jetsun Dragpa Gyaltsen, which was a short commentary on what we call parting from the four attachments. So Jetsun Dragpa Gyaltsen from the Sakya lineage. Khyentse Rinpoche then, in regard to all four, he says, pray that your mind may be filled with boundless equanimity, loving kindness, compassion and joy, as boundless as the bodhisattvas. If you do so, genuine bodhicitta will certainly grow within you. The reason these four qualities are boundless or immeasurable is that their object, the totality of sentient beings, is boundless. Their benefit, the benefit of all beings, is boundless. And also their fruit, the qualities of enlightenment, is boundless. They are immeasurable like the sky, and they are the true root of enlightenment. So we could say here that this is good at the beginning, the middle, and the end. The object, which we generate at the beginning, the attitude to benefit all boundless sentient beings, is boundless, it is good. The benefit, as we're practicing it, there's nothing not to like about being compassionate and having these four boundless benefit, immediate and sustaining us throughout the path is good. And also at the end, this is what results then in the bodhisattvas manifesting according to all those to whom they have connection, meaning all sentient beings, is also boundless, it is good. So Khyentse Rinpoche says, in this, as in any other practice, we should apply the three supreme methods. To wish that what we're going to do may benefit all beings, to do it with full concentration, maintaining the understanding of the empty nature of all phenomena, and to conclude it by dedicating all the merit of the practice for the sake of all beings. So these are also a set of three that we sometimes translate as the three excellences, the three supreme methods. In Tibetan it's Dampa Sum. And Dampa literally means sacred or holy, but it is what renders, there's three holy aspects in that we identify in anything that we do. Of course, when we're doing practice particularly, but in fact, just as a piece of, you got to say, almost secular advice, then this works beautifully throughout our lives. If we have this attitude that whatever we're doing, we have good intention. It might not work out, but at least we have no regret. And it certainly informs our actions and renders our actions far more constructive and intelligent when we have the intention that what we're about to do is to benefit the other. It's not laced with, for example, what we call the three poisons: attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So we're free from that. We don't have an agenda. What we're doing is not laced with aggression. This also, of course, applies when we sometimes would do things out of passive aggression. You know, we look as if we're doing something very nice, but there's actually an evil intention behind. So obviously, the intention is what renders something, gives it its real value. And so we're making sure that our intention at the beginning is one of bodhicitta, and certainly at least that it's free from these three poisons: attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So that's what we call the first of the three supreme methods, the supreme method of preparation. And this we have before we do spiritual practice or before we do teaching. If we're doing spiritual practice, we make sure that we're not doing the spiritual practice just to feel good or for our sort of little nirvana, but that there is this element of bodhicitta, that we're doing this for all sentient beings. And also, this applies also when we're listening to the teachings, that we're not just listening as sort of cool observers, but like we're thinking this is the medicine that will enable us to cure the illness of samsara for all sentient beings. So this is something that we can do when we're hearing, listening to the teaching, practicing, and also if we're dealing with the world and people and situations. We stand far more confidently and strongly if we have this intention, that is wishing to benefit others, or at least not tied up with three poisons. So this is the supreme method of preparation. As far as the main part, what we call, goes, you can see here, it says here, the wish to that what we're going to do may benefit all beings, then so semicolon, that's the first. And then the second is to do it with full concentration, maintaining the understanding of the empty nature of all phenomena. And that means as we're doing the practice, ideally if we could do it without any conceptual reference point, abiding within an unconfused condition of recognizing the nature of reality, free from conceptual constructs, great. If we can do that, very good. Now, Paltram Rinpoche says, failing that, if we could just remain undistracted, whatever we're doing, we follow through. We're in the process, and then we follow through. We don't stop up and start evaluating every 2 steps. We just follow through with complete wholehearted dedication, concentration. Then we conclude, and this also is significant because we could very well, having done something that was potentially constructive, we could then sort of fall back on our laurels and think, oh, I was really good there. And this again, this would just build up more ego. It might be a spiritual ego, but it still would be the cause of suffering. It would still be consolidating this dualistic insecurity of me. And so the remedy is ultimately to be completely free from the notion of subject, object, and action. But failing that, then again, we dedicate the merit in the sense that we just pray that, just like the bodhisattvas of the past they did it, we give away the merit to the benefit of all sentient beings. So Khyentse Rinpoche, that this is then the last of these 3 supreme methods. We say the supreme methods of conclusion. So we have the supreme methods of the preparation, the supreme method of the main part, and the supreme method of conclusion. And Khyentse Rinpoche says, this is the best way to please the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It's not as if the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, they want anything, but just like we, when we care for somebody, we can see somebody's doing something that will eliminate their troubles and bring them happiness, then similarly also we can understand that if there's something that would please the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, it's this kind of magnanimous, great, courageous attitude. And Khyentse Rinpoche says, it is the best way to develop meditative experience and realization without falling prey to the obstacles that arise from anger, attachment, and pride. And again, as we're meditating, we will inevitably be tripped up and fail in our meditation when we're easily carried away by the ordinary habitual concerns. And this kind of bodhicitta, it enables us to have a much more courageous and a much greater sense of vastness, and this will greatly enhance our practice of meditation, experience and realization. And it'll prevent us from being carried away by the habitual concerns that arise from anger, attachment, and pride. So this is then looks like we've finished the section on bodhicitta, the second of the 5 sections in the inner preliminaries. Gauging what warmth others might benefit from and what is over the top and causes suffering, that seems to be a practice in itself. Well, we can sometimes gauge what works and what doesn't. Sometimes we can't. That is where the intention can be quite helpful. And overall, at the end of the day, it's about this warmth that we keep in our heart. And it can never be over the top. The warmth in our heart, yes, we could probably, it doesn't work if we decide to hand over all our savings to the person in the checkout counter. we probably would want to be a little bit practical, but what the point here is what's in our heart. Yeah, what's in our heart, that can never be over the top. We can never have too much bodhicitta. Huh? If we are unsure if we might possibly be causing more suffering, then should we refrain from even trying? Yeah. So again, it's not about the behaviorist aspect. It's about what's inside. So presently our work is generating bodhicitta. And very often situations they invite. Sometimes we don't even need to look for the way forward. It's actually the situations themselves invite. And if we have aspired to develop bodhicitta, very often situations they actually offer themselves to give us an opportunity. So yes, if we have some doubt, it could be intelligent. Then we just wait and see. But the bodhicitta doesn't change. That can never be too much. What if we see others with immense wealth, but using them to do harm? What does sympathetic joy look like then? Well, there's not really that much sympathetic joy, except we obviously can see maybe that person is happy or so forth, but even that, the main thing is really that in such a case, we would feel great compassion, particularly for those that are using their wealth to do harm, because that is ultimately the one that's going to suffer most. There's a story of Paltru Rinpoche, who took his students out to a place in the forest, and they stayed there for a long time. And the students had a really tough time because Paltru Rinpoche, he was very comfortable out in the wilds, and some of the students had a hard time, and they had very little sustenance. Anyway, during that time, then one day they came across there was a hunter who was chasing a deer, and Paltru Rinpoche, the students then chased after the hunter, and they came back enraged because they had obviously been, good boys and girls and had been meditating on bodhicitta. So they came back enraged at the hunter, and Paltru Rinpoche says, "You've gotten it completely wrong. The object of compassion here is the hunter. The deer might have some karma that would be purified through being killed, but the hunter is the one that's really accumulating bad karma. The one who really is going to suffer for a long time is going to be the hunter. And so the hunter is the object of compassion." Now, obviously, in this case, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we help those that are about to do something harmful. Of course, we should probably disarm the hunter and whatnot, if we can. Not always that easy, right? But the point really is that, again, the bodhicitta. And while we don't necessarily have sympathetic joy in the case of somebody who's doing harm, there's certainly compassion and also wishing them wishing them well. Then somebody's saying, unless the hunter is Dokhyentse. Yes, there's some stories about Dokhyentse who and also there's been a few siddhas who did this number with, they were hunting, but they hunted with the intention to connect with sentient beings. And what they did then, as a display that they weren't just being sort of amateurishly hunting here, they gathered, there's a story about Dokhyentse Dorje where he hunted and then he asked his students to keep all the skin and all the bones. And he gathered all the at the end of having feasted, then they gathered all the bones together inside the skin, and Khyentse Dorje, he snapped his finger, and the deer was back on its feet. There's a little footnote that actually one of the hunters he had chewed some of the meat a bit too hard, and so the bone was incomplete. So the deer was sort of limping a little bit. Anyway, these kind of, whether you can accept these kind of stories or not, then this is something that is actually said to have taken place in Kham in the 19th century at the time of Dokhyentse. But yes, sometimes I find it difficult to rejoice with the happiness of others, because it's usually samsaric happiness, which is exactly what locks us into cyclic existence. Yes, it might lock the others into cyclic existence, and that's where we should have compassion. And yes, sure, it's true. There might be. It's a bit like the previous question. Also, it might not be necessarily the kind of activity that facilitates enlightenment, but there's also just a joy that right now that they are happy, and considering the infinitude of suffering in samsara, that there's just somebody having some happiness right now. We could have an element of sympathizing with that. You go out and you have a party with some friends. You can't sit there and say, well, every joke that you laugh at and every morsel of tasty food, that in fact is consolidating the further suffering of samsara. We wouldn't really connect successfully with persons if we had that sort of grim an attitude. Of course, we can have the insight that yes, these are the causes of suffering and so forth, but at the same time, we need to, as bodhisattvas, to be part of society and not isolate ourselves. And engaging with society and engaging with others, then very often it's just rejoicing in very simple pleasures. Laughing at jokes, yeah, enjoying a good time. As long as we're not attached to it, then certainly it's not something that will harm us greatly, and it could certainly generate, and if you're having that sort of thought, then it could definitely generate more compassion, understanding, yes, we're having fun right now, but ultimately it's not something I should be attached to. Ultimately, may all these here, may they connect with the teaching. Was that small misdemeanors for the sake of greater help? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess so. I guess we could steal a car to rush somebody to the hospital. Is that what you mean? Yeah. So this is where we part from the, what is it again, the Kantian categorical imperative, where we actually wouldn't say there is right and wrong actions, but we actually say the value of the actions, the virtue of the actions are contingent on the attitude behind, rather than the actual, the action itself. All right. Any other questions? Maybe class gets 5 minutes early off class today. I think we won't start the Vajrasattva until next time. So there's no more questions. Then thank you for joining, and shall see you next week. Yeah. Okay. Okie Through this virtue may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind. In the pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection, may they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdoms. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we are born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life, thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world. May we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together.